Welcome back, everyone. This is Jeffrey Reynolds with Reynolds Runabouts. This past 2 weeks I've been working on installing the single plumbing system in my boat, which is the bilge pump. So my plan was to penetrate the hull with a Forstner bit, install the bilge pump through a hole fitting, which is what I'll tell you how I decided to do that and why. Along the way, I found some distressing signs of delamination in my original layup from 2002 of the transom when I record it with new BS 1088, British Standard 1088 plywood. And so most of my week was spent fixing a problem I didn't know existed until I penetrated the hull, but I'm glad I did, and I'll show you and tell you why I found that to be a blessing. So let's get to work. One of the safety features I'm putting into this boat that wasn't originally part of it is a bilge pump. And in order to do that, I need, by recommendation from almost everybody, when you put in a bilge pump through a hole fitting, is to get that water in the tube as high as you can and out of the boat. So originally, I thought about putting it right next to the engine well area that will be self-draining. This is already coming up against the back of the motor. It's open behind the motor where it'll drip out. But with the force of a bilge pump, I knew that, it would be really nice to have it over here and hide it and then put the tube away, maybe at boat shows. I'm finding that the volume of water that might come out of here is going to be way too much, and it's going to run right into the back of that Mercury motor and not do what it's supposed to do. So I made the hard decision of coming over to the side here and drilling another hole in my transom well above the water line, below the running gear that is right there. I have to watch out I don't tangle things. So I'm going to do another through hole fitting that will be permanent. I'll be able to take this tube and I will, put it on there, put a nice clamp on it. It'll always be there. I won't have to worry about hiding it during boat shows. And I'll have this little nondescript white through hole fitting that will be showing. So in the spirit of being safe and trying to be aesthetically pleasing and original, I found that to be my least intrusive looking and probably the safest thing I can do for my passengers. So that's what I'm going to do. So you saw me use a Forstner bit, which really makes a nice hole. It's a lot, I think, easier to use than a spade bit, and it's much too small for a hole, so I could have used it, but it's really an overkill. Forstner bit is a lot better. So I went through the 1.5 inch transom. Plywood feels pretty solid. And then now what I'll do is I'll take my through hole fitting and it will go in there, and then I'll, tighten it up with a nut in the back. Before I do that, like with all of the openings in the hull, from the bow to the stern, drain holes, stern eyes or tie down eyes, and 2 holes I drilled in last night to hold the Mercury motor that has not only top clamps, but it also has 2 fasteners on the bottom of the yoke to keep it even more secure. Sometimes those Mercuries will come off the boat and go to the bottom of a lake, and I don't want to do that. So I opted to do that. It's below the water line, or really close. So I will, like all these, I will smear West System epoxy in there, unthickened, so it soaks into the wood. And then I will dish out all of those openings as well and make sure that the fiberglass skin is adhered to the transom wood underneath securely, and make sure it's done, and then I'll ferret it back out and it'll be flat. And then, I should have, the wood will be sealed with epoxy, and then I'll follow all these fittings, including this through hole fitting, with Sikaflex, and that will be the sealant that is around the piece and in between the epoxy and the wood, so that I'll get a good seal against water intrusion, but it won't be permanent. Sikaflex is a little less adhesive or strong, less strong than 5200. And if something ever went wrong, a lot of this stuff I'd like to get out someday if I ever had to. And 4200 or Sikaflex would give me that ability, but do a really good job with adhesion right now and waterproofing. So everything will get that as I, again, continue to try to prevent water from getting into the wood and the boat. By having the through hole fitting here with the bilge pump, I think I'm going to really happy with the not only the look but also the safety that I just added to the boat. So I'll start working on the dishing out process. One of the things I noticed the other day when I was putting these holes in the transom for the yoke of the motor fasteners, I noticed a crack here, which could have been at some point when I was test fitting the motor, I clamped it down too tight, which still should have done that. I have a transom protector being built out of aluminum for that. But this is alarming. This is telling me that my fiberglass skin is not adhered to my inner plywood core. So I'm going to have to go in here and at least start with this crack. And you can see how that's chipping. That means you don't have adhesion. And that would have let water in on day one. So what I'm going to have to do is take that sander I was just using and just work my way around until I find good solid contact. And I also noticed by just simply doing a fingertail knock that I also have a couple other areas that sound hollow. So this sounds pretty good. This does not. This has got a hollow sound. And that's just fingernail slapping. So I'm going to have to work this area. I noticed over on the port side here as well as I was knocking it. That does not sound solid. This is solid. And this goes all along the water line up and over here. So what will probably happen is it just didn't get enough glass in there. So I'm going to have to grind this down, these hollow areas, and probably will find that it chips just like over here, and address that before it So until I move on, because you have to get that adhesion all the way on the boat in the transom, or you'll have a pocket, and that could anywhere. I mean, if I had a hole in the inside, it's tiny, it would find its way into those areas. But out here especially, because I have to re-sand this anyways, I'm gonna take it down with my sander until I figure out what's going on. Thankfully, it just sounds like it's in this one area, like right there. Usually you'll hear them around the holes. Yep. Around that fastener hole I can hear it. So that's hollow. So yeah, just a few areas, not hollow, but it just didn't stick well. So I'm gonna do those first before I move on. So after doing some grinding, I started doing just my pick, pushing, and I can hear not only it cracking, never a good sign. When you hear cracking at a fiberglass boat, it means that there's too much resin or not enough support or a void. On a deck, it means that the core is rotten, you know, the wood is bad. This is telling me that I've got a void back there. I can hear it creaking. So what I've done, I've pushed it all the way around with a pick until I don't see the sponginess or the movement, and then I'll bore this all the way right down to the plywood, because at this point this glass isn't doing anything other than holding paint. It's allowing a void. Thankfully I'm around this hole. I was gonna fair that anyway, but I'm gonna have to take this all the way down to the plywood and then build it back up with fiberglass mat and resin until it's solid again, and then I'll fair it in. I've also noticed over here, so there probably was an area that I didn't get clamped down, even though I had screws and washers when I put this together. It just didn't get, I'm sorry. I left the skin on the boat when I first did the transom replacement and came in from the inside. So even though I probably put enough resin in there, I probably didn't put enough thickened epoxy to make that adhesion. There's always going to be gaps, and the thickened resin epoxy will allow you to fill those gaps. It's fiberglass taking this place of matte fiberglass. You're using liquid or putty to do that, and I did not. So I'm going to push my pick through this whole transom, look for the weak areas, and then proceed to just buzz them down to the plywood and have to build them back up. This is the original, I think this is some of the original wood that was left on the transom that I faired from the inside and then left. So this is the original non-marine plywood from 1957. So what has happened, you can see, here's my glass layup right here, this piece. So what has happened is that old wood, even though it looked like it was in great shape when I did the layup in 2002, it was not. This has delaminated to the point where the original transom, even though I left this glass on the outside, essentially I probably should have just taken it off in hindsight. This is probably the problem. Here's the hole I've drilled for the new one, for the motor, and what it probably did, it felt great, but when I opened that up, it allowed some air to escape probably, and it showed exactly what happened. It's weird because I can look down here and I can see a really nice bond not too far away. So I think the resin settled when I put this laminate, or when I put the new transom on the inside. I put it in nice and wet, and I believe what had happened is that all the resin ran into the void. There was a void there, and it just collected there versus sticking. So that's probably why it's a straight line issue. This area is all bad, and I'm assuming that that's what's happened, is that we are now looking at a lot of this. So what I'll do, I'm thankful that this is the transom I put in, the wood. That is solid as a rock. But the void has always been there, and I just discovered it through happenstance, and I'm glad I did, because now I can fix it. So I will now grind this entire area out down to here, and then get my fiberglass mat and resin, thickened to resin. Well, I'll do laminates, and then I'll end up with thickened resin in the end, try to ferret. So, yeah, a little more work ahead than I thought. What you saw me doing was demolition on my transom. Get to see this beautiful fiberglass new transom wood core, but from here to here it was not even laminated, and that is because more than likely I thought I had enough resin in there in 2002, and I had, these are screw holes which I used to tighten it up, and I thought I had it tightened up, but for some reason from here to here, this space did not receive enough resin to bind it. This is the wood from the original transom that I left there, trying to give me, you know, something to adhere to. And in hindsight, I should have just taken it, because you can see that that plywood was barely holding on to the original glass. It seemed really firm back then, but you can see the woven roving, not enough really to bite, the plywood to bite into. So yeah, really great looking paint job, but if you don't do the work underneath, and you know, that would have been fine, I suppose, but the first time I got a ding or something hit it wrong, it would have cracked it. It's worse than having too much resin. It's a gap. I mean, that's a good 1/16 of an inch of air, that with these holes being where they are and the possibility of intrusion of water, because every time you put a hole in a boat, there's always a chance that something might get in, even though I was going to put resin in there. I'm kind of glad I found it when I did. And you can see the screw holes. This is Bondo that I put into the screw holes after I finished the layup, and I thought it was fastened in correctly. Thankfully, I got over here and it stopped. It's really tight here. So I'll finish up this cut. I'll take this old plywood out that's still in there. Everything else sounds great, except, yeah, this was the bad part. And I knew it stopped over here, and this is where it's starting, you can see it's starting to grab. So I'll clean this all out, make a nice even cut, and then I'll cut my glass to fit that really well. And I'll just start laying it up. Several, probably 4 to 8 pieces of cloth and resin. And then we'll get this back out like we did on the front when I redid the bump. We'll get that all cleaned up and you ferret. And like I said, you know, the paint looks great until something goes wrong and what under the foundation wasn't done correctly. It's gonna come back and haunt you. And you know, because I've been working on this boat aggressively in the other areas, I guess this doesn't bother me as much as it might have 20 years ago when I did it. It's kind of an educational opportunity. So I took it and I learned that the younger Jeffrey Reynolds didn't do due diligence on this layup, and I don't know if I would have, whether I would have known. It seems like I remember seeing the glass and even having resin squirting out, so I figured I was covered, but it obviously settled. This was probably also starved, but this resin sunk and then adhered and hardened, and it obviously left this area, went to this area, and I lost. So we're gonna fix it, and yeah, it'll be better than it would have been if I hadn't fixed it. So lesson learned. That'll be it for today's video. I will now spend the next week or two reintroducing new fiberglass mat and thickened resin, regular resin, as I build up this transom area that I've taken away with my oscillating tool and sanding apparatus. And I'll build this right back out like I did with the bow area bump, and then I'll fair that in when I do the rest of the hull. I'll also be working on putting the resin inside all of the holes in the transom and getting those all sealed up. And with the through hole fittings or areas I've made for my tie downs or bow stern eyes, I'll be putting in bronze tubes that will allow the fitting to be firm in there, but not also work against the fiberglass and the wood. It'll make it a lot stronger and a lot more watertight, and I'll be working on those. So the next video will include me putting this back together and hopefully some other progress I've made on the boat. So thank you for tuning in. Please hit the subscribe button if you're enjoying the episodes that I've produced already. Hit the like button if you're enjoying them even more. And I will see you in a few weeks.